What is going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're having a look at the latest Title Tuesday gameplay between two of my favorite chess players, Praggnanandha, the Indian superstar, the man on fire, and Hans Niemann, the future world champion. Now, while I am a big fan of Hans Niemann in general, he does get absolutely moked in this game. You don't want to miss it. Let's dive right in. All right, in the game, Praggnanandha opens one, knight f3, and Hans Niemann, he responds one d5, seizing control of the center of the board. Now, Praggnanandha, 2g3 is the move, heading for that famous King's Indian attack setup with bishop g2 and short castles. And here on move 2, Hans Niemann throws a curveball with the move knight to c6. Now, what is the idea here? It's very simple. Black wants to go e5, seizing control of the center of the board. That would be sort of a reversed Pirc setup if white went bishop g2 and black went e5. Of course, Praggnanandha, he sees this and he goes d4, clamping down on that e5 square immediately. And now we have some sort of weird 1d4 opening where that knight on c6 overall is a little bit misplaced. All right, black continues, bishop f5 in the spirit of the Jubava London opening, and now black is targeting that weak pawn on c2. He may be intending knight b4 in the near future. Now, Praggnanandha, bishop g2 is the move, and sure enough here, Hans Niemann, knight b4, putting pressure on that weak pawn on c2, and of course, that means the move knight to a3 will be forced, covering that weak pawn on c2. Now, black goes e6, opening up the scope of his dark squared bishop, a very solid move. And now here Praggnanandha, he has the option of driving back that knight on b4 with the move c3 immediately, but instead short castles is the move. Black goes bishop e7, a very solid choice, and now we have c3 driving back that knight, and we have knight to c6 in response. Now overall, black is doing perfectly fine except for one single thing. That knight on c6 is blocking the pawn on c7. Black would rather have it on the c5 square, and that means white will be fighting for a small opening advantage here. All right, Praggnanandha, he's got a lot of different moves in this position. For example, queen b3, queen a4, rook e1, and even the move knight e5 are all playable here. But in the game, queen b3 was chosen, putting immediate pressure on that weak pawn on the b7 square. Now here, Hans Niemann, he has two main ways to deal with that threat. Well, maybe three. One is knight a5, but then queen a4 is annoying. Beyond that, you can go b6 or rook to b8. Now, b6 here is a big mistake, as then white can go queen to a4, putting pressure on that knight, threatening knight e5 ideas, piling up pressure on the pin piece, and overall, black would be in a very difficult position here. Now, instead, in the game, rook to b8 was chosen. That is the right response here, defending that pawn on b7 with the rook. And now Praggnanandha says, let's jump in with the knight. Knight to e5 is the move, putting pressure on that knight on c6. And already Praggnanandha doing his best to turn up the heat in this blitz game. All right, Hans Niemann, he goes knight f6, setting up short castles, a perfectly fine move. And here Praggnanandha, he actually goes queen to a4, moving his queen twice in the opening. First to b3 and then to a4. But this move does make a lot of sense. You are putting pressure on that knight on c6. You're piling up pressure with the knight and the queen on that piece. And how is black going to defend? Well, to be honest, it is not easy. If you go queen d7, you lose the queen immediately. On the other hand, if you go queen d6, then white could go bishop f4, threatening ideas like knight g6 with the discovered attack of the bishop on the queen. So overall, there is no easy way to defend that knight on the c6 square. So with that in mind here, Hans Niemann, demonstrating why he is going to be a future world champion. He ignores the knight and simply castles short. Short castles is the move. Now here Praggnanandha, he gains that free pawn. He trades on c6 twice. Knight takes c6, b takes, and then queen takes c6, gobbling up that pawn. However, here Hans Niemann, if he plays precisely, he should have more than enough compensation for that missing pawn. And here, the key way to follow up for black, you know what? It's a good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to figure out how black should proceed right here in this position. While you're at it, go and smash that YouTube like button for more videos just like this. Here, the key idea for black is going to be h5, the alpha 0 move, threatening h4, maybe h3, and so on. And the key idea, if black goes h5, and if white tries to block it with the move h4, then black can simply jump in with the knight, knight to e4, and it will be almost impossible to get rid of that knight. Black is threatening ideas like potentially easily bishop takes h4 later in the game, maybe g5 and so on, and black overall would have a very aggressive attack. Instead, in the game, Hans Niemann, he messes this up a little bit. He goes a5, gaining space with the other rook's pawn, but this move is significantly weaker. Now Praggnanandha, queen to a4 is the move, sliding back with the queen, getting out of the way of a future rook b6 attack, which would put pressure on the queen on c6, but overall, this move queen to a4 may have been a little bit premature, and instead c4 may have been a little bit stronger. Now Hans Niemann striking on the queen side, c5, a very aggressive mood, and here, Hans Niemann is already fighting for the initiative in this game again, despite being down a single pawn. All right, Praggnanandha, he tries to defend. Knight c2, dropping back, bolstering the pawn on d4, and getting his knight to a better square overall. Now here, Hans Niemann, queen to b6 is the move, flying out with the queen and pressuring that weak pawn on the b2 square. Of course, other ideas like knight e4 were also possible. Now here, Praggnanandha, he takes on c5, d takes c5, then we have bishop takes c5, and now, of course, Hans has quite a bit of pressure on that pawn on f2, and this knight on c2 is a very far way away from that a4 square. Therefore, Hans Niemann, his queen and his bishop on c5 and b6 are perfectly safe. Now here, Praggnanandha, knight d4 is the move, jumping up with the knight, blocking the attack of the bishop on f2, and overall, it is a very good square for that knight. The only way black could chase it away is with the move e5, but that move e5 would be very, very committal. It would permanently weaken that pawn on d5 and so on. So Hans Niemann, he's likely going to be very cautious before making a committal move like e5. All right, so with that in mind, what is the move going to be? Well, according to the engine, once again, the right way forward here for black is knight e4, followed by h5, gaining space on the king side and spearheading the attack overall. Instead, in the game, bishop g6 was chosen, and this move is a little bit passive. Yes, you are defending that bishop that was on f5. Yes, white was threatening knight takes f5, but overall, this move, bishop g6, while it does maintain control, it is a little bit slow and a little bit passive. And here, Praggnanandha, he slides back with the knight, knight b3, a very precise move, putting pressure on the bishop, blocking the b-file, stopping future queen takes b2 ideas, and therefore giving this bishop on c1 a path into the game, perhaps on f4, g5, or maybe even e3 once that bishop moves. All right, now Hans Niemann, what is he going to do? Well, it turns out he should be keeping the bishop alive, therefore bishop d6 is the right way forward, but instead rook to a8 played in the game. He is concerned about the pawn on a5. Of course, the queen and the knight were targeting it, and now we have the queen and the rook defending, but again, this move gives up that dark squared bishop, and from here, white is going to win the very important bishop pair and have a huge initiative in this middle game. All right, knight takes c5, then queen takes c5, then bishop e3 targets that queen on c5. Where is the queen going to go? It drops back to c7. Queen c7 is the move, but now Praggnanandha c4, gaining space on the queen side, opening up lines, and of course, that pawn on d5 cannot move. If you take on c4, then bang, you lose the rook on the a8 square. That is no bueno, mi amigo. Instead, rook a to b8 played in the game, targeting the pawn on b2. Now we have c takes d5, Praggnanandha trading one of those pawns, then knight takes d5, and then we do trade the bishop for the knight. Now that is a very controversial decision. Of course, you are giving up both your very important Catalan-style light-squared bishop as well as the bishop pair. However, in return, you do damage black's pawn structure after bishop takes and then e takes. And now here, the key idea behind this whole sequence, bishop takes and then e takes, is that here in this position, the queen and the rook on c7 and b8 are lined up, and Praggnanandha, he plays the very simple tactical shot, bishop to f4, skewering both the queen and the rook on the c and b files. Now the queen has to move, queen to e7 played in the game, and then we simply have bishop takes b8 for the new winner of the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament. White is now officially up the entire exchange in this position. We have bishop takes, then rook takes, and get a load of this. White is up the rook for the bishop, as well as one entire pawn on the queen side. That gives white a massive advantage. All right, now rook f to e1 is the move, supporting the pawn on e2. Of course, the queen was attacking it, and now Hans, rook takes b2. He flies down with the rook, winning that pawn, but of course, it is a temporary victory as white does regain the pawn immediately immediately on the a5 square. Queen takes a5 played in the game. Now Hans Niemann, h6, giving his king some loft on the king side on h7 if it needs it later. Then queen takes d5 is the move, picking up that pawn. But now here, rook takes e2. Hans Niemann returning the favor on the e2 square. Rook takes e2, then rook takes, then queen takes, and then queen d1. Praggnanandha flying back with the queen. He knows if he can simply get to an endgame with these queens off the board, he's going to be completely winning with the extra rook versus the bishop and the extra a pawn. That passed a pawn will shoot down to the a8 square faster than you can say Hans Niemann will be the future. Faster than you can say the chess speaks for itself. All right, queen to c4 is the move. Dropping back with the queen is the future world champion Hans Niemann. Then queen b3, flying up with the queen. Queen c6, again Hans Niemann. He has to avoid the queen trade, and maybe his one chance is to get some sort of aggressive play on the king side, capitalizing on these weakened light squares as he still has that light squared bishop. All right, Praggnanandha, he knows this. f3 is the move. Locking down those light squares, a decent idea. Now we have queen c5, attacking on the newly weakened dark diagonal here. King g2, then queen to e5, centralizing the queen and targeting the rook on the a1 square. Then rook to f1, sliding over with the rook. h5, h4, locking down the king side, then bishop f5. Then we have rook to f2, the rook lift on the second rank, queen to e1, the queen flies down, queen to b2, defending along the second rank, then bishop e6. And again, Hans Niemann, he's got to make something happen or he will be blown off the board, as here Praggnanandha begins the march of the a-pawn. a4 is the move. What can Hans Niemann possibly do to stop it? Bishop d5 is the move, getting the bishop on this diagonal where it does control the queening square on a8. Now queen d2 is the move, once again offering the queen trade, and again Hans Niemann does decline. Queen to e6, then a5. Bishop b7, queen b4, queen to c6. Hans Niemann setting up some dangerous threats on this diagonal. Now queen b6 again offering the queen trade, and again Hans Niemann must decline. And I do have to point out right here, Hans Niemann, he is down to 1 second left on the clock. It is not looking good for the future world champion. All right, a6, driving back that bishop on b7. Bishop c6, a7. That pawn is now 1 square away from promoting, and of course Hans Niemann still in time pressure. He is not looking good here. King to h7 is the move. Queen b1 hits the king. g6 blocks the attack on the king on h7. Then we have queen to e4, flying up with the queen, opposing the black queen on d5 and the bishop on c6. Now here we have queen takes e4, f takes e4, bishop takes e4. Hans Niemann winning a single pawn out of the exchange. However, the king goes to h2, and you still have that pawn on a7 to deal with, not to mention you are still in massive time trouble. Here Hans goes f5, and now we simply have the move rook to e2, and in this position Hans Niemann simply resigns on the spot to Praggnanandha, and here's why. The threat is simply rook takes e4, f takes, and then a8, promoting to a queen. And if you move the bishop, let's say to b7 or anywhere else, then Hans just goes rook to e8, threatening a8, promoting to a new queen pretty much on the spot. So no matter what you do here as black, you are simply going to lose in short order to Praggnanandha. And for that reason here, Hans Niemann, he simply resigns on the spot to the new 2025 Tata Steel Chess winner, Praggnanandha, my favorite Indian superstar. Wow, what a game between Praggnanandha and Hans Niemann in the 2025 Title Tuesday tournament, which happened this week. All right, Chess YouTube, comment down below in terms of what you thought of this game, in terms of Hans Niemann's and Praggnanandha's play. These are literally two of my favorite players right now, so this was a joy to commentate their games. So again, comment down below in terms of what you thought, and smash that like button, and I will see. Oh, and if you want to see, actually, I've never covered another game between Praggnanandha and Hans Niemann. So if you want to see one of Praggnanandha's very best games from the 2025 Tata Steel Chess Tournament, which he won in January, or maybe late February, January, February of this year. Check out this video right here, where again, I cover one of his very best games from that tournament, and I'll see you in the next video.